You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. And now your footwear insiders, Matt Priest and Andy Holt.
Taping live from Portland.
Taping live, that's an oxymoron.
Taping live, is it an oxymoron?
I think so, because you're
Jumbo
putting
shrimp
something
from
on
Portland,
tape
Oregon.
while doing it live. That wasn't
The
called
audience
for.
liked it. Hey folks, it's Matt and Andy. We are live in Portland, Oregon at the Northwest Material Show. And this is one of the U.S.'s largest material trade shows where vendors from all over the world are coming to show their raw materials. You got design, development teams, material teams from all over the country, from all the leading brands.
Material nerds.
Flying in and taking a look. And we just finished yesterday. We just finished our
now it's not evergreen. You just totally blew the evergreen thing.
I don't care. Blake's gonna get on me no matter what.
That's true.
He's got comment.
He won't shut up.
He nags me more than my wife. Come on.
Where's the laugh track for that?
All right. But yesterday we finished our third annual Material Summit, which focuses on material innovations, developments, trends, future trends. And so we've got two of our industry's leading innovators joining us today. We've got Chris Hillyer, who is the Innovation Director at Deckers Brands, who is a veteran of this show. Welcome back, Chris.
The early days, I think.
Good morning.
A couple of years, right?
And then we have Nicoline Van Enter, who is the founder and director of the Footwearists, which is a group of people across the world that work on footwear that are just trying to make footwear better for consumers and for the industry, right?
Global network, and she's the queen. She's the overseer.
Your Highness, it's nice to have you back on the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So yesterday, yesterday's event was really awesome, I think, in a number of different ways. But Nico, you did a panel that was really fascinating on not just future materials, because we all talk about, this is like a mushroom leather, or this is like an apple peel that we're going to use, or this is a tree that we're using, right? So we see this stuff, but your panel was really about kind of how we're developing the next generation of materials and like advanced technology. Yeah. So maybe give us a quick overview of what was said and some things that's happening, and then Chris can chime in on what he's seeing from his perch at Deckers.
I'm pretty focused on the apple peels.
Are you?
Yeah.
Johnny Appleseed.
That's been my emphasis for quite some time now. Hailing from Washington State, we have a lot of apple peels.
They're growing. They're biofabricating apple peel with hair on it, with shearling for the boots. That's what it is.
Right. We're growing apple peels.
Hairy apple peels.
All right.
Anyway, but no, I had invited a small group of people that it turned out to become a very big one.
Yeah, it was awesome.
I had half the stage full of people, and my focus was more on material application, because what you find on the more high-tech side of materials, when it comes to whether it's 3D printing or molding or combinations of that is not so much about the ingredient of the material, but it's basically a whole ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So there's a combination of the material, the software, and the hardware, and that combined leads to not only a new material, but basically a whole new way of making footwear. So we had a group of people that came through DSM. It's a Dutch chemical company who sponsor lots of different startups. In this case, it was from their additive manufacturing department. So they brought two companies that do very advanced 3D printing. One was Voxel 8, which is liquid 3D printing on uppers. And this is a system that's indeed also a software, a mixture of polymers, and a machine. That company can either buy as a system, or they can basically have the system put in their company and pay per print, depending on what's best for them, depending on the quantity that they make. And the interesting thing about printing on the upper is that you can do many different things with it. So it can either replace stitching, it can be decorative, you can do supports on different places on the upper. You print directly on a textile or without a textile, but I think most people do it on the textile. And you can essentially print on there different types of structures and textures that are responsive. So you can make, say you have a plain textile, you print on that. It can be more rigid in certain areas, stretchier in other areas. And that's all the things you can arrange with the printing. And we had Walter Voigt of Adaptive 3D, and they have very advanced polymers that can be printed in lattice structures, which can also be responsive to your movements. And again, this is a combination of a polymer, software, and in his case, a very large machine that they are building that could eventually do hundreds of thousands of, whether it's full shoes, midsoles, uppers.
Well, we've seen a lot of the Lattice, right?
Yes.
We've seen it from Under Armour, New Balance, and it's all like, the idea is it's supposed to be computer generated so that you have better cushioning or support where you need it.
Yeah. Oh, there's actually a whole Lattice
yeah.
company right next to us.
Right
There's so much
what's
lettuce.
Sponsored by the.
So if
Yeah.
that's, is that a trend they're capitalizing on, or is this something completely different? I mean,
well, what bothers me a little bit, I mean, of course, the idea of lattice, and we're not talking about the vegetable, but actually about about
Not lettuce,
3D
lattice, right?
well, if you talk in the South, you talk about lattice. You talk about a redneck, cross section of wood that divides your property to your neighbor's property. So we're not talking about that either.
That's an insight right there.
That's
a personal experience.
I know.
We had a lot of lattice growing up.
That was not on my
Charlie
radar.
Polk was a lattice fan.
Oh, gotcha.
Well, that is actually the same. I mean, that's the same term.
Yeah.
It is
So,
the same idea.
A lattice structure.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
And
so that's what it comes
I would
from.
think
is
there's a
like
lot of
fence.
lattice in Santa Barbara at wineries and other like posh spots. I have to imagine.
yeah, it's all organic.
So if you turn that into a shoe, you have, you have a
Yeah, but
lattice.
the difference is what we see now is mainly midsole, right? And he's talking about doing uppers as well.
Well, but my whole issue with people just using the way lattices are used now, it's not just a nice texture that you could create with a printer, because we didn't see any of these things, because this is a typical type of refined texture that you would create with the 3D printer. Now, the idea behind these textures is not that they just look fancy.
Right.
You can actually create materials that respond in a different way. So normally, say I want to have an outsole that has 3 densities, I would normally, in a molding situation, have 3 different compounds that I would put in 3 different compartments of my mold. In this case, you could have one material and one print, but changing the density, structure, and direction of the lattices, of those little branches, basically. That's how you create a very different response throughout that sole. So the whole idea could be, but so far no shoe companies have done that, at least not in the commercial realm, is that you would say, I'm going to scan the way you walk, so not just the shape of your foot, but also how your foot moves. Where's pressure? Are you pronating? Now, if you're pronating, so basically your foot moves inward, we would put an insole in that is more rigid under your arch. What you could do with the lattice is, instead of making something more rigid, you could actually have a material that pushes your foot back in the right direction.
Wow.
So this is a completely different way of thinking. This is also what is very attractive about lattices. The other thing about lattices is something that we call topology optimization. It's quite a complicated term, but essentially means that you have the right balance between the amount of material that you have and the function that it needs to have. It basically stems from nature. So if you have a tree and the wind hits the tree on a certain side, it grows more material there, but takes away material from somewhere else. And this whole principle is an algorithm, essentially, and this is also what you could translate into lattices. But what we see now, also when we see the designers look at lattice, it's like, oh, it's so pretty. That's a nice texture.
Right.
You know, it's all over Instagram. You go to any 3D printing show. I was at Formnext in Frankfurt last year, which is like the 3D printing show. I left after 2 hours. I was just overfed on lettuce. I was like,
well, that's exactly right. I think it's becoming a look.
yeah, it's a look.
And there are, there's software programs. One of them you're doing a big training on for Grasshopper. Grasshopper creates lattice structures if you want it to do that, and it creates that look. But I think that what Nico and I absolutely agree on is this is all stemming from something called generative design. So it's using, and this is the engineering world has been using this to optimize shapes for generations. That's why our airplanes fly, and that's why we fly them in computers before we build one to test it out, is we're able to model things, and using a technology called finite element analysis, we can put strain and stress and weight and lift and other things on these engineering parts and determine where things are weak and where things are strong. Well, the beauty of generative design is now the software is sophisticated enough and it can say, oh, your part is weak here. We're going to put more material there. And it's generating these lattice structures to support your part. Yeah. But it's become a look.
Right.
And I think that's what Nico's saying. It's like, now it's pretty. It looks really cool. And I think it's a trend, right? We're going to see lattice structures, whether they're 3D printed or not, showing up all over the place because they look cool and it's different and it looks like the future. And we're all very excited about that. But at the end of the day, we're not taking advantage of the generative part. We're just making something that looks cool.
Right.
Hey, Nico, can we kind of keep walking down your panel? Because it was.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we got sidetracked a little bit. Yeah.
What was really interesting to me were the guys from Peak and the product they have, fully 3D printed. And we've done so much in the industry on 3D printing in the sense that it's the sexy thing, it looks cool, it captures the imagination of our consumers, but it's the shanks, it's sampling, it's kind of the less sexy part, but here you have a fully 3D printed product, and even the people in the room or the experts were passing that around like crazy, saying, I'm a size 11, or whispering to them, hey, where's my next pair? Talk to us about what they're doing in this space.
Yeah, I was very happy that they would come, and it's interesting how that works because, I mean, these guys are essentially the first to do a fully 3D printed shoe. Of course, we've seen from the Adidases and Nikes and Under Armours of this world, we've all seen 3D printed stuff, but none of it was a full 3D printed shoe with both upper and sole, fully wearable, for a very acceptable price because it was like retail for $150. Okay, they don't make a profit on that yet, but compared to the other shoes that we've seen, that's already like half the price. And when I invited them to come over, they were like so honored, and the only thing they want to see here is like, oh, I want to go to Nike. Where I was like, so that's, but dudes, you have a product that they don't even have. And what I like very much, especially, I mean, I've been doing a lot of 3D printing for wearable shoes since many years. And indeed, when you go to China, there's so much progress on both the material side and the printers. So the 3D printers there are also way cheaper than what we find here. So people have this idea that they need to go for printer the price of a carbon printer, which could be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, like lease and constructions like that. That's not the case in China. So they have set up their own, their offices in Beijing, but they set up their own printing facility in Quanzhou, close to Xiamen, where they combine several printers. So it's also interesting where we keep having this discussion about, FDM, which is with filament, as an inferior method of printing as opposed to like SLA, DLP, and SLS. It's just a different method. So you would make different parts with different types of printing. So it's
also getting a lot better.
It's getting a lot better.
I mean,
as well.
FDM. We had an FDM printer in school, and I went to art center in I graduated in 2000. We had an FDM printer that literally looked like you were just squeezing out toothpaste, and it was it was a disaster. You couldn't really do anything with it. But the ones today, it's like they're quite sophisticated. You're getting really good surface quality.
You're getting really good surface quality. I mean, also I think personally, when it comes to materials for those printers, we are much further than we are with the high-end printers in terms of having a PU, a TPU, TPE that is actually wearable, that has great abrasion resistance, that is full wearable. So they just went for it. And also what I found really interesting talking to the different parties when it comes to a lot of stuff that's happening in the Western Hemisphere in terms of printing, etc. It's very much like, we want to have this closed system of IP. You basically, you work with our system and then it's exclusive to you. It's very difficult when we look at a lot of the new printers for some of the smaller companies to have access to that technology. And of course in China, it's kind of like, it's open to everybody. Yes, you could say, that's an issue with protecting my IP. What if I send these people my design and they're going to run with it or whatever? Might happen anyway. It's always a difficulty. They're very open to having whoever wants to print with them come to their factory and work on the machines because they also see the advantage of that. In printing, you just need to try lots of things.
Yeah.
It's all trial and error, and they'll do some of their own stuff, and ideally, if other people bring in stuff, then you can see where you get, and I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I thought what was interesting too was the times of printing are now decreasing. Right?
Yes.
They said it took them about 3 hours to make one side, so 6 hours for a pair.
Yes.
But I thought what's really neat is if you think about it in a different way, because we always think of scale, like we need 100,000 pairs. But there's so many people out there that are dropping these product launches that are like small, and they're just trying to infuse a little bit of life into the brand and get some awareness and attention and build a bigger following. And we see it with groups like Keds, and we see it with, of course, Nike are like the masters of the drop, right? Limited quality, but you see it with Yeezy and all these other people too. So here's a unique opportunity where the cost is getting more affordable. It's a lot faster. You can do unique things with it where you could, these guys, I think the launch was 1,500 pairs.
1,500 pairs, and so it was sold out within an hour.
Right.
Like,
so
it's gone.
You can just do these really interesting things and try it out, and it's kind of like if it doesn't sell, you didn't lose that much on it.
You don't lose that
right?
much. And I honestly think that there's so much focus on how fast is this. The main hurdle that we have actually is to get the system in place that can do the customization.
Right.
Because, it doesn't cost you more to print something custom in terms of the machine and material. It's more the whole system before. And that's where you see that all companies are struggling. How do we get to getting data from the customer about their size and their aesthetic preferences? How do you co-design something? Then how do you get that to a workable model that you can print? And that's where they're all struggling. And that's why also for the larger companies that are doing 3D printing, they're not bringing that to market.
Yeah.
And so I'm always a bit frustrated when I still see this whole system of, we need to do mass manufacturing with 3D printing. The big advantage of 3D printing is custom. Mm-hmm. And I keep not seeing it happen.
Custom and localized.
Custom and localized. So you could do that. So I really hope that the next step will be to implement more of the actual customization. And then it doesn't matter so much whether this is done in a minute or whatever, because you heard from Walter yesterday from Adaptive 3D when they're working on the large machine. We can do it in a minute. Eventually, you're kind of like, if you say that you're doing this in store or whatever, how will you feel about a shoe being made in a minute right in front of your eyes? How much will you pay for that? It's going to be, it's not necessary.
Right.
And I'm really hoping that a lot of the fashion brands will start learning from the orthopedic. I never see people going to orthopedic companies to understand how custom is done.
Right.
But the orthopedic companies have been doing that since forever.
Long time, yeah.
Yes, I work for a company in the Netherlands called Nimco. They have a fantastic factory in Portugal. If you go there and see how that whole system works, they do everything fully custom. People can learn a lot from that.
And there's
Chris,
sorry.
No, go for it.
Just before you go, having had footwear issues myself and having custom orthotic.
Here we go. Tell me about your feet.
Yeah. The shoe selections are terrible, and there is definitely a market for fashionable orthopedic shoes that aren't ugly. Now, right now, it's interesting because ugly dad sneakers are in, so all the orthopedic people are like, woo, yeah. But soon, my friends, it will go out of fashion, and you will again be out of fashion. So
that's true. I mean, that's a good point, Andy, because that leads me to kind of, all right, so we have Nicoline here who's kind of breaking down barriers and exploring and very entrepreneurial and out there kind of assessing the landscape on innovation for footwear. And then, Chris, you work at a traditional footwear company with a stable of brands. It's fashion brands, athletic, outdoor, active. What's your role in kind of seeing what Nicoline's curating and others and curating yourself and then trying to bring that into the business, a more traditional footwear business?
Yeah, it's, when you think about a wholesale business, which, Deckers, for the most part is a wholesale shoe company. We do have our own stores and have a thriving online experience. We can play on the edges of that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, this is truly a revolution in the way that people are framing up how shoes are built. How data is collected from consumers and the expectations of the consumers as well. So it's challenging. It's easy to talk about. It's fun and thrilling. But when the rubber hits the road, it's like collecting all that data and creating algorithms. And then, I always tell people, it's like, all right, you've gone through all this effort. You've generated this amazing system for collecting data and scanning feet, and you build a product and you deliver it to them for their $380 or whatever you might deliver it to them for, and then they're like, oh yeah, those are nice. It's like, what are you going to get tomorrow? And she's like, well, I saw something else in the store that looked pretty cool. And so it's one is we have to be very careful. Is it all worth it?
Right.
And so the way that we approach things, and obviously I have to be a little bit more careful about what I share, but the way we approach things is we keep our eyes open. We need to know what's going on out there. And when something lines up and is going to fit, and it might be unexpected as well. It might not be the whole enchilada that Nico's talking about, which, trust me, it's on the radar. I mean, that's the future.
Yeah.
And what I love is, you also had Stuart Jenkins
yes.
On the panel, and it's like, you start talking about even, that's taking a more and he would slap. He used to be my boss. So I can say this.
I noticed you filming him from the side. I don't know. Were you trying to get
I was snooping. He likes to post pictures of himself. He's very vain. I mean, with all that, he has all that facial hair now. I mean, he's really upping his style.
He's quite witty as well.
It was a riot to have that guy.
He's a shoe sage.
Yeah.
A shoe shit. You can say that 3 times, it won't work.
No,
Maybe we should explain what he's working on.
I'll have Nico explain it because it's a little inappropriate for me to explain what Stuart's doing.
Nico.
No, I invited Stuart because I mean, my intention was not necessarily to focus only on 3D printing. It kind of turned out like that, but it was really about new applications. And what he's doing is reinventing the way we do molding so that we can actually use a lot more of the industrial ways, not also post-consumer, but first of all, mainly industrial ways, in our soles and our midsoles. And as we all know, the way we make tooling now is super expensive, takes long. He has made a way where that is way cheaper. For a couple of $100, you could basically have molds made. There's a very, very high content of recycled foam in there. And I think that is a fantastic step that people can apply now. Right. It also shows that you don't have to go to a whole super fancy high-end 3D printing system. This is stuff that people can do at their factory now. Right. So I thought
what was interesting is you can incorporate different types of recycled foam. So what we were talking about earlier, you can find different cushion points on a shoe and try different things in different colors.
It's a very, I find it very inventive and at the same time very simple, logical way of working. So you have different densities of foam.
Right.
You distribute the foam in different ways throughout the sole depending on what you want. Then you bind it together with the virgin PU. You try to have as much recycled content as you can. You basically make a skin, like a sleeve around it that keeps it inside. And that's a completely different way of sole making than people have done so far. Right. And when you see it, you're kind of like, oh, duh, why did people not think of that before?
If somebody set up shop here where they were taking recycled shoes and they were getting the foams and they were recycling and they were using this molding system to make them here, they could, and Matt will have to chime in, but they could import uppers and somehow form them here and evade duties. Is that right?
Imported components have a lot smaller duties. So companies like New Balance have thrived on the ability to bring in components from China and assemble them in the U.S. and have pay minimal to no duties on those parts.
So that's the other advantage, right? So you get some unique, interesting midsoles. In addition to if you create something like that, and again, it doesn't have to be 100,000 pairs. It could just be some unique product. You're just trying things out and selling small quantities and just injecting in some life into.
You have to look at kind of where the industry's been in the last couple of years, and we felt like we were coming out. We had like the Innovation Center at Lighthouse at Under Armour, the Speed Factory at Adidas. And so you felt like there was this culminating thing, like we were pushing towards more of this happening here. And then the CEO of Adidas as well, we're actually this is stuff we're going to bring back to Asia. It's kind of a test thing. And I just don't know, and I haven't heard much on Lighthouse recently, so I just don't know what is actually happening if the commercialization of localization is something that's
I get many more questions. I do a lot of consulting on micro manufacturing. I'm setting up. You guys have the scoop on this, and I'm setting up a new. Is there sound for that? Exclusive.
We used to have a bell.
That's not it. That's like one of those cow things. That's not what we're going for, Blake. You're fired. But only until after we finish taping.
Exactly.
That's like a clown horn, which immediately makes it not okay.
Just going through all of them. Now we're just hitting everything.
All right.
Now I need to make the announcement. So I'm working on a center starting in the Netherlands because that's where I'm from, and I have a lot of partners there, and we're quite central. That really explores the opportunities for local manufacturing and local circular manufacturing. So and I feel that I want to do this outside of. It's difficult to do this inside a larger company because you have a structure already existing. We really want to test how we can reinvent the whole process from beginning to end. So from the design, the types of materials that you use, how the shoe is assembled, how it can be taken back from the consumer, how it can then be disassembled and recycled. All these are questions that we're only scratching the surface on now.
Right.
And so I'm setting up a center. I'm interested in anybody who wants to partner in that. So I was also very happy to hear Stuart say yesterday that's exactly also what he wants, making small factories in containers that you can go around the world. And what I find interesting there, that's a need that we have in the world everywhere. So whether it's in our side of the world where we don't have manufacturing anymore, whether it's in China where they do have manufacturing but would like it to be closer to the store or in-store, because a lot of my customers that I do consulting for on micro-manufacturing are in China, but they want to do it as entertainment. But also, I would really like to see this happening in African countries, where we now see production starting, but I'm hoping we're not going to go down the route of Asia where you first have all the polluting manufacturing, and then we have to clean all that up, and then we might start
generations later.
Yeah, I'm getting approached by a couple of very starting schools in Africa, one in Nigeria and one in Kenya, to see if we can set up programs. They approached me to set up programs for African students. And I was like, and they first asked, can we do leather sandals? And I'm like, that's not what I would suggest we do. Mm-hmm. Why don't we start straight from the most modern ways of sneaker making in small micro factories that we could then spread out. Solar powered, because the power grid's not stable, but that's the same thing that we want also on this part of the world, to have it solar powered, to have it as circular as possible. So that's what I'm starting on.
Isn't it?
Awesome.
I mean, it's such an exciting time. I mean, I think a lot of time, like we had a lot of sustainability conversations yesterday, and it's overwhelming, right? Like we're all expected to do a lot, and it's like, oh my God, we got to make all our shoes out of recycled soda bottles and stuff like that. And it's like there's not enough bottles out there, and then we're like, oh, what do we do next? And it's like, and there's a couple things, just from that standpoint that and Nico, you just said it, and I love you for this, that you were always 3 steps ahead, but. We really have to put a lot of effort into thinking about what our shoes do when we're done with them.
Yeah.
And I think that it's and I'm not going to discourage anybody from being more conscious about how we're building our products, but what do we do with these things when we're done? Yeah. And I think that we really need to consider that.
Yeah,
and
totally.
it's a big challenge that we have. Europe is far ahead of us as far as this being something that's a concern of the EU. But in this country, we put in Asia as well. They put so much into landfills and they incinerate, and most of our shoes end up this way.
Yes.
And so we need to start really considering how we deal with that situation.
Yeah, that's the next frontier, indeed.
We need the business models for it. I mean, Nike just introduced, I think 2 days ago, their Adventure program.
That's right.
And I have a little bit mixed feelings. I mean, I was very enthused to see it happening. It's a subscription system for children's footwear. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we need mainly for, if you start thinking about recycling, the big issue is how do I know when I will get my shoes back? If you want to run a business including recycling, I cannot just sell you a pair of shoes and maybe you bring it back in 3 years or maybe not, or you have to regulate that. So I'm sure that that's also one of the reasons why Nike is setting up this system, and we'll see more of these systems. I'm a bit ambivalent about the system because they also offer an opportunity where you could have 12 pairs a year as a kid, which I don't think is necessary. And if sustainability is your goal, I'm kind of like,
these are growing kids, Nico. Growing kids
so fast. All these hormones in the food. I guess so. No, but that's on a side note. I mean, of course, from a commercial perspective, I totally understand that.
Yeah,
then again, I looked at it and I was like, and they justified it by saying, but this is for people who would already buy a lot of shoes and we recycle them. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, but recycling should not become like a way to justify more consumption.
Yeah.
And that's actually also not what we're trying to do.
That's their choice. It's an option, right? So it's not as if they're requiring you to do that, and all of a sudden you have a bunch of shoe boxes of shoes that you're not going to use. So it's an opportunity, and that's up to them. But they must be applauded for at least thinking differently about this. And I think that we need to take their lead. And another conversation that we had yesterday is just like, how do our companies start working together? And I think the FDRA is such a great platform for us to come together and have these conversations where we have such influential people in these meetings. How do we start having these, conversations about working together and saying, let's do something a little bit differently?
Yeah.
And it's significant.
The business model is interesting, though, because based on subscription and send back, they're creating that demand that you have to actually be able to recycle the shoes, right?
Yes.
Because, I mean, if you're your brand on your own and you're like, we want to recycle our shoes, it would be impossible because there couldn't be a business model set up around that where
Wrong word.
What's that?
It's not impossible, Andy.
I'm just saying, just listen. It would be hard for someone that would take the shoes in to recycle it at a small scale, right? It wouldn't be profitable. But if we can get 5 or 10 brands together to say we're going to use this recycling center, set it up, then it becomes profitable for somebody to run it and actually have it happen, right? So their business model is interesting because they are actually generating the demand and high volume they need to make it work, right?
Definitely. You need high volume. But mainly it's also about regulating. So now, since with the center that I'm working on now, indeed, where we're setting up, like, how do you make the calculation where you say, okay, we produce a shoe and then we want to have it back and retrieve the material from it, and with that material, we're going to make something else. Not necessarily shoes, but because that's also quite difficult. So then, if you have to return it into shoes, you will get similar things like with the Adidas Futurecraft loop, where you can use part of the shoe, but you still have to add a lot of virgin material.
I had a conversation. So my boss now is a guy named Jean-Luc Dayard, who is he was the former CEO of Solomon, and he was the founder of Hoka. One, or a co-founder with Nico Marmont. And we were talking about this concept a couple of weeks ago, and he brought up the fact that he was in the ski industry, and all of the ski manufacturers got together and said, skis are not particularly great for the environment once you're done with your ski. And as a group, they got together and found a solution. And it's not perfect. I mean, they basically collected skis, ground them up, and they were able to work with concrete manufacturers and other people that were able to mix it into their material to at least find a place for it.
Right. It sounds like a great shiplap opportunity to put, recycle, get refurbished skis, you put it on your wall. And
Chip and Joanne.
Exactly.
People make fences and chairs out of them, but that's
lattice. Can we make some lattice?
You were on it with that one. But ultimately, we're not considering that. And Nike Regrind, Nike Regrind has been around for decades, and they're not telling people to stop sending shoes in because they have enough. And I think that let's not forget. And so sometimes we don't need to invent our own programs. Maybe we need to talk to Nike Regrind and say, how do we participate in a more meaningful way? True. And that's one step. And then the other side is, how do we start building product for maybe disassembly or for circularity? I mean, Adidas just put together that beautiful program using TPU. Is it going to be limited? Absolutely, but it's the right steps. Definitely. Like, people are starting to think about these things. And even this FDM printing, it's like those filament printers, the material itself can be extremely recyclable. So you could take an FDM printed shoe and recycle it, and that's significant. So it's in the same sense that you can take a styrofoam bowl and eat a cup of rice out of it, and literally make a new styrofoam bowl out of that styrofoam. I mean, it's completely circular. Not trying to endorse styrofoam in this, but it's that type of material.
Yeah, well, we need those solutions anyway for the materials that we have.
Indeed. But collection is a massive issue.
True.
How do we get shoes back?
Well, these conversations will keep going. These issues are... What's fun about this now, that I think from 5 years ago you had a fear about discussing this, and now I think today it's an opportunity, and it's exciting to talk about this stuff, and because there is possibilities, and people are trying to work together and look at things, and we'll be really interested, and we'll be following closely your research that you're doing on this. We're having internal discussions about how we pull the industry more together and work together on different things. Recycling will be one of those that we're starting to look at and figure out to help create the volume that would be required to make it work for someone to do it, and what happens with it. But I don't know. You guys are just so awesome to be able to share what you're thinking about. I think a lot of people in the industry, I mean, it's just like anywhere else, but we do the daily grind, right? We got our jobs, we got our head down, we got to knock out our work, and then it's refreshing to hear these conversations because it pulls us up into the air a little bit, and we get to breathe a little bit deeper and think a little bit more about what's happening. So if you want to keep up, especially with what Nico is doing, it's Footwearists.
Footwearist.com.
Footwearist.com.
We have our online academy, footwearology.com.
Yep.
And of course, we have our design summit coming up.
Our design summit is coming
November.
up in New York. Plug in that, and you can learn more about that on FWA.org. But I want to thank Chris and Nico for not just being on the show, but helping develop many of our programs that we work on. You guys are great collaborators in the terms that we can email you because we don't obviously know everything about the innovative world and what's happening, but you guys do, and you're.
I don't know.
We're grateful you help guide us and help us develop programs that do help have these conversations at our summits. So
we'll launch the Apple Uggs.
Yeah, Apple Uggs. Apple Ugg.
I don't think you can say that either.
No.
All right. But we did. Folks, until next time, this is Matt and Andy signing off from the Northwest Material Show. Until next time, Shoe In is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.